All right, well, here's a few news articles while we're waiting for folks to show up. This is probably the most important one. This woman on the Trump administration finally approved Biden's transition. Trump says he's not conceding yet, but this is probably as close to it as we'll ever get. He's not going to block Biden's access to the transition resources anymore. So that's really good news. You've all been waiting for that. This one was very hard to believe. Apparently, the in San Francisco, somewhere in San Francisco area, in Santa Clara County, the Apple security team wanted to have concealed carry permits to have guns, which is reasonable because there were some people that went and shot up tech centers recently. And for some reason, they couldn't get them. And so they had to bribe the official in the Santa Clara County District Attorney or somebody in the government had to bribe him with thousands of iPads, 200 iPads, in order to get 4 concealed carry permits. So now they're prosecuting that guy and Apple and everybody. I knew there was a lot of government corruption around here, but I didn't hear of it being quite that bad, and that is kind of amazing. So anyway, we'll see what comes of that. And there's another one too coming up here. Not that one. Anyway, so this I thought was pretty interesting. If you plan to go gather with people at Thanksgiving, this gets you to measure your risk level in percentage, and based on how many people you think are infected per person that's tested positive, because we still don't have enough tests in the United States at all to test enough people, and the size of the event and what area it's in, how bad the infection is. As you can see, the infection is much worse in the middle of the country now. It moved from the blue states to the red states in the last few months. Anyway, obviously the bottom line is you shouldn't go to anybody shouldn't go gather with people on Thanksgiving or Christmas, but an incredible number of people are. Like 1 in 3 people say, oh, it's fine. They're going off to like a big gathering. So we're going to see a huge burst in cases a week after Thanksgiving and another huge one a week after Christmas. So it's going to be a really bad winter. So I'm doing, and I hope all of you are doing too, I'm just making plans to basically hide completely and go out as little as possible, be much more careful, because this is going to be an insane winter. And such a shame with the vaccines coming. Here's the local San Francisco tracker, and this shows the local statistics and breakdown by counties in San Francisco and neighboring counties. And this I'd never seen before. This is the reproduction number. This is the number of people that one person with COVID infects. So if it's 1, then the infection stays constant. If it's less than 1, then it's dying out. If it's more than 1, it's exponentially growing. And as you can see, it's up at pretty much its peak value right now in every county. So, it's very dangerous out there. I've been trying to buy groceries for the last several days, but every time I look at the store, it's absolutely full of people. And so I'm going to go tomorrow at 5 in the morning, which is a better time to go to a place like that. This is the other local corruption story. And, this place is famous for government corruption. San Francisco has been for decades, if not centuries. And this guy, Mohammed Nuru, totally did something corrupt in the world of public works and has been prosecuted, and a bunch of other people have gone down with him. His thing was rigging the garbage collection fees with unnecessary additions to the garbage collection fees, which somehow went into his pocket and out of his gang. And this kind of thing happens all the time here. My friend who's been around in the 40s said it was just well known back then that if you want to build a house, you call the inspector and you have to pay a bribe to the right guy and he'll approve it. If you don't pay a bribe, he won't approve it. And he just got used to doing that for everything. So anyway, and I know I've heard that there's people that hit all the Chinese restaurants and demand like protection money, and if you don't pay it, they'll burn you down and stuff like that. It's classic mob type corruption around here. San Francisco, yeah, that's right. San Francisco, you can't do anything without a permit. That's right. And it's pretty famously corrupt government here. But apparently, in a couple of cases, they're actually doing something about it. And there's an incredible amount of corruption in the college too, because it's part of the government. So you just have to accept it around here if you're going to get anywhere. It's very hard. It's very hard for an idealist to get by in a corrupt system like this, but that's what there is. Anyway, so these guys went online and bought cheap routers, and they found that the routers contain not only security flaws, but what appear to be intentional backdoors, even so far as to have a graphical user interface for unauthorized use of the router. So he found down here, they have a backdoor here, just a web page where you can execute a system command. And he found that if you put these things on the internet, they start getting hacked and turned into members of the Mirai botnet and so on. So it's a little bit worse than I thought. I knew they had a lot of security flaws, but they seemed to just leave backdoors in them. And, you know, this was a very common practice. Until about 10 years ago, you would leave a secret backdoor account so your help desk could get in. But these seems to have ones there just for botnet control or something. So it's I don't know if this researcher being paranoid or if it's really true that they're deliberately putting in remote control. And this is part of the kind of stuff that I think leads to things like the Huawei ban, the ban in America where you can't get the Huawei 5G equipment. This is a well-known fact, I think, by everybody in the business, is that if you buy cheap stuff from China, it's typically very insecure. Although it's not common to say it's got a deliberate backdoor in it, but it might as well because it'll have an easy to find, well-known vulnerability. And this was pretty interesting. MacKeeper is essentially Mac malware. You see ads all over the place. If you put it on your machine, it doesn't do you any good, and it often seems to do harm. And Apple apparently has approved it. It is a recognized binary and permitted with the Apple security, and people are getting upset about this. So again, it would be interesting to know what in the world has provoked Apple into considering this stuff legitimate when nobody else does. All right, just a minute. I think I need to turn on a light. My green screen isn't working too well. All right, anyway. So GitHub had a code injection vulnerability. They had some way to set environment variables in GitHub with an API call, and you could execute commands with it. And so Google found it and told them and gave them their traditional 90 days to fix it, and they didn't fix it. And they gave them an additional 2 weeks to fix it, and they still didn't fix it. So they finally just dumped it publicly, and 2 weeks later they fixed it. So I'm sort of pleased to see this because, you know, I've done my bit of vulnerability disclosure, and it's good for people to get used to the fact that you're just going to dump it publicly if they just ignore you forever. And there's no point lying or blaming it on you or suing or anything. And so I hope people get used to that. Because in my experience, nobody ever cares until you dump it publicly. And I don't know if any of you have done this. If you go to like a big university, there's these weed out classes with like 1,000 students where they hardly try to teach you, and their own purpose is to remove all the people that aren't smart enough so you can focus on the ones that are going to get a Nobel Prize. And they're talking about it, and studies show, as I think anyone should have guessed, that your success in such a class is not really a matter of intelligence or skill. It's just a matter of how intimidated you are and how much you feel sort of like you are unworthy and you just want to drop out. So it's really kind of a test of self-esteem or your social class or something like that. And so they had like a psychological exercise to make people feel better, where they said just list your 10 goals in life and then talk about what your major motivation is, to remind you that you're doing this for a purpose, and that will cause people to not give up. So I think this is a big issue, and I think a lot of the reason why City College exists is that there's a bunch of people that are very valuable that get washed out by the usual system, which is pretty much just filtering people by how rich their parents are or something like that. And, you know, I was talking about this earlier today on a news report, and one of the other people there said, well, you know, otherwise they're not being picky enough who they let in or something. And I said, well, you know, it's the only way I should go to college. I went to a nowhere undergrad school. When I was proud to the big grad schools, they wouldn't let me in. I went to University of Illinois that said proudly they do this. They said, we let everybody in, and then we will read them out later, so everybody gets a chance. So, and I did take a class. I was the TA for classes like this. But, you know, anyway, it's I was in grad school, though. At undergrad, it seemed like a pretty miserable place, but in grad school, it was a good place. Anyway, Yeah, here's what they did. They gave them an exercise in which they ranked various parts of their lives in order of importance. And then they write an essay for 15 minutes about the most important thing in their life. And somehow just doing this makes people take a more positive attitude about the class. I think it just gets them out of some feeling of insecure, I don't belong here, into remembering, wait a minute, I have a goal and this is just a step towards my goal and I should like calm down and do it. I guess, I'm not sure. Anyway, I think it's a big issue, the psychological problems that hold people back. All right, anyway, I guess I'll let this one wait because we got plenty of other things to talk about. We're down here to Windows System Part 2, and this is the registry. And the registry is a huge issue in computer forensics and therefore instant response when you're trying to understand what malware and hackers have done to a machine. At first, the Windows registry seems very painful. So if it's the first time you see it, it will seem like too much to memorize. After a while, you get used to it. But the Windows registry is, the point of this is if you install Linux and you install Apache and other programs, every program has its own configuration file in a text file somewhere in a different format. So it's scattered all over the place. And Microsoft decided they didn't like that. So they gathered all the settings for everything, all the software, all the Windows components and everything else, and put it in this binary thing called the registry. And so this is your central location of every form of customization of every piece of software on the machine. And then what happened is Microsoft had all these window-driven systems, and like Windows 95 and Windows 98, where you click File and you'd see it. And sometimes you'd have to click File, and then you have another menu after that. And what happened around the time of Windows XP is the menus were so deep with so many options that people were complaining that they couldn't find things. So Microsoft started making smart menus where it will remember what you clicked on and move that item to the top. So now, in order to customize everything, it keeps track of everything you do. It keeps a record of what you've been clicking on and how often you've been clicking on it, so it knows which thing you're more likely to click on to move it to the top. So that the end result is that the registry, in fact, keeps track of a lot of everything you do, which is enormously useful for people who want to find out what you've been doing. Now, one weird thing about the registry is it's not stored in one file, it's stored in 5 files. System security, software, SAM, and default. This is Security Accounts Manager. And then those are the ones in the system root, see Windows System 32, those are the ones for 32-bit system. Those are the ones that affect the entire machine. So they take effect when you first boot up. Then when you log in, you have personal registry keys, which are the settings you have made in Control Panel, the background of the desktop, and things like that. And so that's in your ntuser.dat file and your userclass.dat file. And those are in your profile. So the registry is a weird mess created by 5 files during boot up, and then 2 more files to change the contents later that depend on which user logged in. So it's not at all as simple as having one file on a disk, and that's the registry. And these things are called Windows profiles. When you first log into a system, not when your account is first created, but when it is first used, it creates this profile for you, see user's username, and it creates these registry items and other things in there, like a My Documents folder and a My Pictures folder and such. And if you connect over the network to a share and log in, you have a password hash that is stored on the system, but you do not have a profile folder because you don't actually get an interactive desktop to use. You just get access to one folder. So that's the way it works. So in the registry, you have these things that look like folders, but they're not folders. They're called keys, and every key has to have a value. And each value can have a data, or it can have the value not set. So here's a default that's in every key with value not set, and here's proxy enabled with a double word integer, which is set to 0. So those are the terms, and everything comes from the 5 root keys: classes root, current user, local machine, users, and current config. And you get used to these long paths leading to keys starting with these things. And what's even more nuts is these 5 things do not point to 5 files on the disk uniquely, and on top of that, these are not even 5 separate objects. 2 of these objects are in fact shortcuts to go inside the others. This is the way Microsoft always makes everything. They do not think logically and cleanly like the mathematicians that made Unix. They think like business executives. they think of a business purpose and have a convenient way to accomplish that one business purpose and forget about logic or cleanliness. That's why there's always like 5 different ways to do everything in Windows. And it's frustrating to your sort of mathematically oriented people. It's designed for business oriented people. So this maps to something called the default hive. You have HK users, has security identifiers for each user. And this is where it stores entries for each of the ntuser.dat files. And so on it goes. It's sort of baffling. So these are the HKey current user and HKey current control set are created when you boot up, and they point to the current one you're using. Control sets are an old trick from Windows intended for laptops with docking stations. So you can have multiple hardware profiles. So remember, you have one monitor with a monitor driver here, and you have a different monitor and keyboard driver over here. And when you boot up, it'll ask you which one you're in. And so that's what's called the current control set. And the current control set is the one that's used while you're running. But when you turn off the machine, there is no longer any object called current control set. Instead, there's just a series of control sets with numbers, and none of them is considered current. And that's really important because a ton of important, forensically important keys are in this. So you have to get used to the fact that if you did not get your image from a running registry on a running machine, but from a static disk image, you can't have a problem figuring out which control set was current. And for that matter, which user was current. So, all right. So there's the keys and values in the registry have a timestamp, but only one, last write time. And it's changed anytime you modify a key, but not when you change the values. When you add, remove, or change I think the name of the value, but not the contents of the value. I'm not quite sure. It's a little confusing. I'd have to try that to find out which one really matters. Anyway, so here's the run key. Here's this the one place you look very often. Windows current version run in local machine. This is a thing that will automatically run every time you reboot the machine. And here's a bunch of objects with exactly the same last write time. So that means either they're all created at the same time because these programs are automatically launching and it's the time when this user account was created, or some of them are added by malicious people later and they stomp the time to match and you can't tell because there is no creation time on them. All right. And of course, Microsoft updates it in a sort of unclear way, so it might not be exactly right. So, be aware, these timestamps are not as good as you might hope they were. And all right, then there's another fun thing, of course. Microsoft, with its support of legacy software, it always supports an entire architecture behind where you are. So 64-bit Windows can run 32-bit code, and 32-bit Windows can run 16-bit code. And so it does that with redirection. And that means if you have a 32-bit program, which then tries to put something in the registry, it does not put it where it should put it in the registry. It puts it in a special place called while6432 node, which is where it stores the lies to tell 32-bit programs. So when a 32-bit program tries to go in the registry on a 64-bit machine, it doesn't go into the registry path that it asked for. It goes in here and finds out what lie are we telling 32-bit programs today, so they can create what appear to be 32-bit registry modifications without actually messing up the machine. Just that timestamps are not updated in any logical way. They're not updated immediately. There's sometimes a bunch of them are updated all at once, so you can't trust them. So this is true of a lot of things in Windows. You have to test it before you know how much to believe it. Anyway, so here's some keys: system configuration, Shim Cache, auto run, and user hive. So the system configuration keys, here you've got the computer name, the Windows version, and the time zone is really important. If you don't know the time zone, then you will misinterpret all the timestamps on objects on the machine. And then you've got a list of the installed applications. This is another nasty thing about Windows. If you install software, you typically do it by using a Windows product, which will help you. You run this Windows product, you install your software, and then you run it again. It takes a snapshot and it creates these Windows installers. That's why they always have the same steps. And they create an uninstaller. And for some reason, the uninstallers do not work very well. This is why the registry gets corrupt. You install software. When you uninstall it, it does not really remove all the registry keys. And as you use your Windows machine, it gathers this junk in the registry. But anyway, you'll see the installed applications here in the uninstall app name. Those are the Microsoft uninstaller entries. And here's mounted devices like USB drives and hard drives. And then there's USB store, which is really big. This shows every USB device that has been connected. And the point of this is if you plug in a USB device, this was a big part of Microsoft's plug and play. The idea was you could buy a USB stick, you could plug it in and use it right away. Instead of having to install a special driver for each device, it would automatically find the driver. I see a question, how good is uninstalling programs on Macs? And that's a very good question. I do not know the answer. I don't think Macs have anything like the registry. And on a Mac, you just throw it in the trash and it's supposedly gone. It's a good question whether Macs leave junk behind. I haven't heard of that, but it's possible. I don't know the answer. Anyway, so one thing about USB store, when you're doing a legal case, you look here first because you have a search warrant, you get a laptop, and the first thing you do is look on the laptop to see what has been connected in the way of USB devices, and then you need to write another search warrant or court order to get those. Everything is in the app file. I don't understand the question, Shannon. On a Macs? Macs still have stuff left over. Okay, I don't know what the app file is. Yeah, well, there's some discussion there on Macs. Okay, good, yeah. There, app folder, perhaps. Yeah, normally when you install something on a Mac, you just drag it into the app folder, and then you throw it in the trash. But this is good. You people may know the answer in Mac. Feel free to put it in there if you know. These are good questions. Anyway, you got network information here about wireless networks and firewall settings and such in the registry. And you've got the audit policy. You can turn on auditing on a Windows machine where it keeps extra log entries to record items like people accessing a certain folder or something, and you can record these things. And that's all in the registry. And then there's this thing called the Shim Cache. This is another thing like we talked about before, I guess it's another class like detours. Microsoft has a bunch of customization options. And so the point of this is to keep track of your compatibility settings. One big issue is for older versions of software to run on modern versions of Windows. So this will keep a lot of information about files that may have special compatibility settings. You can see if you try to run an old program on a new Windows machine, it'll open this thing called the Application Compatibility Troubleshooter and let you tell that app that this is really running on Vista or XP or some old version. And that's the kind of information you'll have here. So here's the Application Compatibility Cache, and it can have up to 1,024 entries. And so here's a tool. Shim Cache Parcher is a Python tool that will let you open up this application compatibility cache thing and get all the information about it. And now it shows you which things have been run and when they were last modified. So you get another record of what's been recently run on the machine. So let's try some of these Cahoots. 12B1. That looks right. All right. All right. Maybe enough. I'll give it a few more seconds. So, which Hive file has many instances? That's NT user, one for each user account. One for each user profile, I should say. All right. All right, which one is not included if you capture the registry? This is the one that does not exist in a disk image of a machine that's powered off, which is normally what you mean here. All right. All right, which one has 128 recently used programs? That's the prefetch. We've talked about it before. All right. And which one is only on 64-bit systems? That's it. Windows on Windows, 6432. All right. Good. Mm-hmm. Well, I know who all those people are. Good. All right. Yeah, I realize you don't need the points, but that's fine. Doesn't hurt anything. All right. Anyway, so that's commonish time of the year, by the way. Some people are ahead enough that they don't need the points. Anyway, so there's some auto run keys. These are auto start extensibility points. Not all of them are in the registry, but there are a lot in the registry. There are 30 or more ways to make a machine automatically launch when you reboot. So this is what malware puts in for persistence, and there are undocumented ones as well. The auto runs tool from sysinternals is the best way to find them all. But the most common technique is services. This is sort of the cleanest way to do it. A service will launch when you boot the machine, and typically before you log in. So it's running under an identity that is automatic, like system, the most powerful. And you can put those in the registry. The registry contains a list of what services to launch when you start. So you'll see it here in each current control set services service name. And it has all the information here about how to launch it. So it looks like this. Here we are in HKey local machine system, current control set services, landman workstation, parameters. And here it's listing DILs. So it will use these libraries and launch them to run a service in the background. And so Service Control Manager is the program that controls these. You can launch it as services.exe is the name of it. And you can start it with the SC command. You can control these things from the SC command, but you normally use the graphic services tool to do it. And so here's the SC query looking for the WUAU serve, which is, I think, Windows Update, one of the Windows Update processes. Might be more than one. There's a lot of them. And here's the GUI, of course, that just lists all the services. And you'll see there's a lot of them in Windows machines. Not all of them are running all the time, but you can control them from either of these menus. And one executable can run many services. So for example, here's svc host.exe, and this one svc host is running 3 services. This one's running about 10, and there are typically about 10 of these svc host things running. That's how it works. So it's one exe running a bunch of DILs. And you can just add a registry key and make your malware launch in one of these services. And that's the way it's most commonly done. But there are other things. There are run keys that will just run an executable directly. and you put them in Microsoft Windows current version run or run once in a variety of places. And these will, again, automatically run either when you start the machine or when that user logs in. So, all right. So there's a thing called active setup that will has to do with installations and updates, and you have all these long globally unique identifiers, they call them, GUIDs, that specify objects that are going to run. So this one here with this particular log is an installed component that's going to launch, and you see all this path to run a DIL, and then here's the DIL. So this is the executable. This is the command line, basically, the executable and the DIL that's going to be launched with it. All right, and then there are app init DILs that we mentioned before. Multiple same names exe. I don't understand the question. You have a question about this? These are all different, but there are two that are the same. You're right. No, they're not. They're slightly different. Yeah, there is not a duplicate in the so-called globally unique identifier, but it is reused on other machines. That's why there was a thing called God mode on Windows XP where you type in one of these and you get control panel. Yeah, duplicate exe, not okay. Well, there can only be one file with a name and extension in one folder. So I'm not sure I'm getting to the point of your question. In one folder, yeah, every folder can only have one file with a unique name. You cannot have two files with the same name in the same folder. If you have another run.dil.exe, it would have to be in a different folder. Okay, anyway, so these app init DILs are automatically loaded for everything that attempts to interact with the user. And it does things like drawing windows, so you can click on things. And so these DILs listed in app init DILs are launched automatically attached to everything that interacts with the user. And all right, I don't see this image helping as much as I hoped it would, but anyway, there's a list of DILs in there. And GUID is just a unique identifier Microsoft uses to identify objects. It's as long as an IPv6 address, looks like this funny thing. Microsoft uses it all over the place. And like everything in Microsoft, you can remember the name by realizing it always tells you the opposite of what it is. It is not unique. The globally unique thing is the same on every machine. That's why they call it a globally unique identifier. Somehow that's the way Microsoft names always work out. Anyway, the local security authority has packages, and these things load up on startup, and the idea of these is they are things you would need in order to perform authentication. Some funny way of logging in or something. The local security authority is here, and so these are things that might be used for some unusual login, but it's another place that you can launch malware. And then there are browser helper objects. Nowadays, we all have things like Chrome and Chrome extensions. But in the early days, Internet Explorer had these add-ons or plugins, and these rapidly turned into potentially unwanted programs, toolbars, the Yahoo toolbar, and so on. But those things are here. They're gone with Edge. They're only there in Internet Explorer. Now, I see another question. Is there a book, Undocumented Windows? And again, I'm not getting enough information in the question to know what you're saying. I don't know what, yeah, you'll have to tell me. I see people host blogs sometimes with undocumented Windows features, but the opposite in Microsoft. All right, I'm not figuring out any of this. You might want to unmute yourself and just talk to me, because the questions on chat are not communicating enough information to me to answer them. Anyway, and then there's shell extensions. You can add things to Windows Explorer. Like if you notice, if you load 7-zip, if you right-click on a file, it will now have new menus to open here, like 7-zip. So you can have open with and WinRAR and so on. These are added here. With certain programs you install, they now connect to the shell, which is the Explorer window. Okay, good. Yeah. Anyway, and that's another item kept track in Registry. And here's the login. And this is an old trick to get into Windows machines. When you first log in, it will launch your shell. Now, if you're used to Linux, you can choose your basic shell, which would be something like Bash, or even your graphical environment like GNOME. And in Windows, it does the same thing, but it's almost always this one, Explorer, which is the one that draws the start button and the desktop and all that jazz. But you can set it to load something else when you log in. That's the WinLog on shell. And this is an old trick to bypass the login screen on a Windows machine. You would change the path to Explorer, and then when it tries to draw a desktop, it would give you a command prompt. Anyway, then there's UserInit, loading things that load when you first log in, and again, you can add more things to it. And so if you want to find these things, you can look at these things that are automatically running and just sort of with experience, notice if they are unusual things that you haven't seen before, if they have spelling errors. The problem is it's real hard to do. And there's often a lot of tests like this, like you'll see on the web, which one of these links in an email is a spam link. And it's a lot harder to tell than you think, because some of the criminals are careful and make good looking stuff. And some of the real professionals write sloppy stuff. So for example, here's an example. Which one of these is malicious? You've got HPDJ in a temp file with no description, IPRIP, looking for something about router information protocol in C Windows System 32, RF alert, monitored events is spelled wrong in alertmon, and here's something called Synergy C to share your keyboard. And they talked about this in the book. The problem is it's very hard to tell. And in this case, all of them are legitimate, including the misspelled one and the one with no description. It's this one that's wrong, because the real program is IPRIP and this has an N in it or something. So that's why it's quite understandable that people have difficulty spotting malicious items in these startup menus. And I found this undocumented Windows book. Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, there might be an undocumented Windows book, so I'm not surprised. A lot of people like to find these things and accumulate them. Anyway, so here's what they recommend if you want to find malicious entries. Remove things that are signed. You can get a code signing certificate. I just finally got one after 3 months of struggling. And then you're in a special club of known publishers of software who can be trusted. So that's a good thing. Then remove persistent things that were created outside the time window of your event, and then look at the paths of these things. If you find something in a temp folder or other strange places, that would be a clue that it's not a legitimate program. And then you look at the hashes, MD5 hashes. You can look at them in VirusTotal and so on and see, is this a known commercial product, or is this some weird thing that's not known, in which case it's more likely to be malicious. And the other thing you can do, which is simple, is if you have if you've deployed images at your company, then you have a clean image with all the required software, and whatever is not in that image is suspicious. So these are general tricks to track down whether something is malicious. It would be nice if your antivirus or something could be relied on to catch these, but it can't. It'll catch some of them, but certainly not all of them. And so I mentioned auto runs is very useful to list many of the things that launch automatically. And Mandiant Redline is recommended in the book, although in my practice, I'm not getting much good out of it. My feeling is that Mandiant Redline is not much use for modern systems. Anyway, and the other problem, the whole point of code signing is you would have a cryptographic signature that would mean you could trust something. But in the last several years, malware authors have been signing malware. They either bribe or steal real code signing signatures from companies and then use them. So it's an issue. There is signed malware. So just because something is signed does not mean you can trust it entirely. And that was the original intention of it, but it has not worked out all that well. So 12B2 is here. All right. Good. Let's see. Oh, there it is. This new background makes it hard to see what's going on. Just trying to see how many people we have. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. All right, the command line utility. It's SC, service control. All right, which one will cause malware to launch whenever a program that draws windows starts? And those are the app init DILs when an application initializes. All right, and what about the Yahoo toolbar? Browser helper objects, they call them. One of my students actually worked for a San Francisco company making one of these things that was really pretty malicious. And they started doing nastier and nastier things. And when they finally asked him to write into the toolbar something that would man in the middle HTTPS connections and steal the passwords, that's when he quit the company and said, I'm not working for you idiots anymore. Anyway. All right, so which item is explorer.exe? That's your Windows logon shell. All right. I know who that is. And that's another one. Good. And good. All right, good. Looks like we're just about on time here. So the user hive. This is the ntuser.dat, which is where you often go looking for a lot of good things. And so every account has these, and there are machine accounts also that have them, but normally you go here for the personalization of an individual user that's been doing something on the machine, and you're trying to reconstruct what that person has been doing on the machine. So here's the things you'll find in here: shell bags, user assist, MUI, most recently used typed URLs and typed paths. These are the most important things to find here. So shell bags, the point of this, I remember when I started using Windows like 2000, I noticed this: you'd open a window, you'd set it to like details view and put it up in the corner. And then when you open that window again another day, it would come back in the same location in the same view. It's remembering what your customization settings were for each directory that you open, and those things are called shell bags. And those things persist even if a directory is deleted. So if I create a folder and view it and put things in it, and then later delete it, the shell bag still has the name of that folder and the settings when it was last opened. So this is sort of like those registry keys you were mentioning earlier. The Windows creates these objects to customize things, and when they're no longer necessary, it forgets to remove them. This is in fact a persistent problem all through Windows. In Linux, there's this thing called link count, where every time you have another program that uses something, it increases the link count. And when you remove that program, it decreases the link count. So it knows when an object is no longer being used, and then it deletes it. And Microsoft does not keep track of this stuff well, so it keeps having leftover junk that it doesn't know whether it's useful or not. And this is why you'll see Windows popping up saying, when you want to install something, x472.dil is, should I delete it or not? I don't know if some other program is using it too, because Windows doesn't keep track of that the way Linux would. And anyway, these shell bags are also retained even when they're pointing to folders that don't exist anymore. So they contain the date and time of access. Yes, it's the same thing as a bad uninstall. You create objects and then you don't remove them later, so they're left as sort of junk in the system, which is handy for forensic examiners because it means there's a trace. The user thinks they deleted something, but there are in fact traces of their action still left. So you know when it was created, and of course that's very nice, date and time of access, and so on. So you know they've been doing things. This is why the most common thing, of course, is somebody's getting fired. So they download a whole bunch of proprietary company data, put it on their desktop, zip it, put it on a USB drive, then delete all that. Then they sneak off with the stolen property. And you would find records here showing that sort of thing happening. Or malware, where it unzips something, runs a malicious thing to steal something like the password hashes, then deletes itself. You'd again find records here. So here's shell bags. Again, you have to go get some kind of tool to read them. And you'll see here the folders, registry, Ripper, and so on. The name of the folder, creation date, and so on. So you just see what folders have been created and where they were. And here's User Assist. This tracks what applications you've launched through Explorer by double-clicking on things, and it keeps track of how many times you've run it and the full path. And the purpose of this, I think, is like the prefetch folder. It's so that when you log into your machine and you open like your browser and you read your email, the CPU is just sitting there doing almost nothing. So it takes, when nothing else is happening, it guesses what you're probably going to load next and starts loading it up in RAM, so it'll load faster. So this User Assist key keeps track of what you appear to be using lately and preloads it for you, and therefore leaves a record of what you've been doing. So it's quite similar. This tracks items open by Explorer, but not from the command prompt because it's tied to the GUI, but prefetch does not know what user launched it or how it was launched. It just knows that this program was launched recently, so it does a similar activity, but there are some differences. And another thing that is kind of amazing is if you go to User Assist, I don't know who at Microsoft had this idea. They notice how you can't read anything, ZYPEB. They have obfuscated all the names of objects in prefetch with ROT13, which is where you move every letter 13 steps forward in the alphabet. And it is just ridiculous. It's something that you find in like small children's cartoons. It is like this, PUEBZR is Chrome. P goes to C, U goes to H, and so on. I don't know why anybody bothers to use such a weak cryptography. It is laughable. But that's how Microsoft has it built into their system. Can you track malware through prefetch? Well, I imagine you could. Anything that's launched should in principle be in prefetch, so I would say yes. Anyway, that's the point. This is, I often bring this up in cryptography lectures as an example of just appalling cryptographic errors. Anybody using ROT13 for anything is obviously an idiot. I mean, it doesn't hide anything in any effective way. Anyway, so here's the multilingual user interface. One big sales point of Windows is it's a multi-language operating system. You can install the multi-language version of Windows, and then it can be customized to be Japanese or Arabic or whatever you want. And that's kept track here. And it again keeps another list of programs. And I think it's keeping track of what language to launch that program in, or something about the customizations required to run it in different languages. But it's another record of it all. And then there's the most recently used keys. This is so if you're in a program, you can go File, Recent Files, and it shows you the recent files here. This is not standardized. It's a feature used by applications. So even if Windows isn't keeping track of everything you do, the program you launch, like Microsoft Word and everything, is keeping track of what you do. And this is like your browser history. So it's the standard. There's no standard way it's stored. It depends on whoever wrote this program, but it's another way. That's why, if you want to do something bad on a Windows machine and then try to lie about it, you're in big trouble because there are so many records of what you've been doing all over the place. There is a thing called MRU Blaster, which will try to remove these. It reminds me, there's a thing called G-Zapper that will try to remove all the Google cookies on your machine. Good luck with that. Google keeps track of you many, many ways. They always know who you are, and it's essentially impossible to conceal your identity from Google. But G-Zapper is a product that at least at one time, I don't know if it's updated, would try to find all those cookies and remove them. But it's sort of pointless because how long is it before you open another Google page and then it all comes back? Anyway, so there's open and save MRU most recently used items. So here you find the ones that are part of the Microsoft Windows desktop. So here's more lists of most recently used programs. And here's the start menu. These are the ones you can launch from the run box. If you click start run, you get a command line, and it has a most recently used list there too. So you'll find it here. Here's things that have been launched from there. And there's recent documents. Used to be start recent in some versions of Windows, and you'd see all your recently used documents in every program. So again, there's a recent docs registry key, keeping track of what you've been doing. And then there are things that keep track of what you have been typing into boxes, presumably so you won't have to type them again. They'll be on a list. So you have typed URLs, which are web addresses you've typed into usually the address bar of Internet Explorer, but you can type web addresses elsewhere, like a run box, and launch web pages. And then you can launch paths in a bar in Windows Explorer or elsewhere. So these keep track of things you have typed in at the keyboard, which is of forensic importance, because one thing people will do if they've been doing something illegal on the internet is they'll say, oh, I just clicked on a link in email and it went to that bad page. I didn't really type it in. And if you find it here, that proves that they really did type it in. So things like this, you're typing in something. That's what this list is. These are things you've typed into that bar. And so that proves that you have an intent to go to that website if you're trying to bust people for doing illegal things on the internet. And here's the most recently used from remote desktop. This keeps track of what other Windows machines you've been controlling with Microsoft Remote Desktop, which is called Terminal Server because it's a licensed version of Citrix Remote Control Client. And then there are tools to analyze the registry. Reg Ripper is one that will just take data from registry and put it in a form that's easier to read, and other things like Registry Decoder. And auto runs, I mentioned one of my favorites from sysinternals, will find all the things, or at least a lot of the things that are automatically launching when you launch Windows. Yes, incognito mode doesn't prevent all this. You know, the only thing that incognito does is it doesn't store cookies and it doesn't put your stuff in the browser history cache. I don't think it can stop all these other things from measuring. One thing I have thought about years, I never really tried it much, is to run a browser in incognito mode and then go see how many of these traces are there. But I think a ton of them would still be there. Yes, absolutely, Raymond. If you actually want to clear your tracks, it's very hard. So this is the point. It's the same with all crime. Criminals will try to conceal evidence of the crime, and the more careful forensic examiners will still find it. So, you know, if you just clear the internet history, that will stop some people. But if you use more and more sophisticated tools to hide your tracks, it will get harder and harder to find you. So how does the software prove you have intent? Well, all it can prove is that you actually typed in that URL instead of just clicking on a link. So that proves some intent to go to a site. That's the idea in court. But of course, one fundamental weakness of all this is there's no way to prove that you're actually the person sitting in the chair. All they know is who was logged in. All this is just, you can see this just with regedit on a live machine, or you can use any of these tools. These will, and the typed URLs, I think, applies only to URLs typed into Internet Explorer and probably Edge and the run box. And the other one is typed paths. That's going to be paths you typed into Windows Explorer when you open My Computer and type in a path. So they're just for the system. And so there are special utilities just to find these particular things like shell bags, user assist, because these particular keys are quite popular. And if you do cell phones, by the way, there's a whole bunch of expensive products you can buy just to get the data off a cell phone, like all the photographs and all the instant messages and stuff. And it's a similar issue here. These are programs that will fetch the interesting part of the registry. Let's take a look at this. Shim Cache parser is to log what you type. No, that is to find out what is in the Shim Cache. So the Shim Cache is going to record what programs you've launched. And this tool will help you read the data because the data is stored in the registry in an inconvenient way. All right. See if I can get to my here. This is 12B3. There we go. Shell bags keep track of the customizations of folders, where they're opening, and whether they were in details view and things like that. So like all of these things, they spy on you as an incidental byproduct of an attempt to make the machine more comfortable and easy to use. Yes, I believe the GUID is the same in all Windows systems, yes. That's why you can look up things like this thing called God mode, where you just have this GUID which you can type in and it will open the control panel on every Windows machine. What you type in search, well, no, there is no effective way to hide it. That's true. There's no way to hide anything you do on a Windows machine. Everything you do is pretty much being recorded here and there. Just like, this is a fundamental principle of forensics, that everything you do leaves some kind of trace behind, like fingerprints or footprints or something, and you can never perfectly conceal what you've been doing. Oh, how much of this is sent back to Microsoft? That's a very good question. In principle, almost none of this should be going to Microsoft, but in modern versions of Windows, some of it does go up to access their cloud services. And there isn't much good documentation. There's just very people that get mad. God mode, people thought so. Really, all God mode is essentially another control panel. People got all excited about it about 10 years ago, thinking it was something special, but it's pretty much just control panel. And I see another good question about using a virtual machine. If you use a virtual machine, all these registry changes would be in the virtual registry and not in the host. So that would contain, I think, these registry things. If you were then to say delete the virtual machine and clean off the unused disk sectors, it might be really gone. Virtual machines are a pretty good security boundary. That's why you can do things like run malware in a virtual machine and be pretty confident that it's not affecting the host. Sizer Kozar, yeah, for some of you, I forget that one. Typing from host to the VM could be intercepted. Yes, that's right. That's right. It's not a perfect isolation, but it's pretty good. A lot better than containers. Well, this is good. I'll start this one. All right, so which one identifies the programs but not who launched them? Okay, that's prefetch. Good. And which one persists even if a directory is deleted? Those are shell bags. All right. And which one lists programs from the start menu, but not from a command prompt? That's user assist. And which one proves that you intentionally went to a website? That's typed URLs. A name that actually means what it says for once. All right. All right. That looks like a more or less real name. All right. That's definitely not a real name. Have to tell me who they are. And that's a real name. All right. Good. Let me get that there. All right. So, a lot of good questions. I'm going to stop this recording and post it up.